Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of AEC Marketing for Principals. This is the podcast where we like to spotlight leaders who are shaping the built environment through innovation and through impact. As you know, I'm your host, Katie Cash, and this season is all about change makers, those people and projects that are redefining what's possible across the design and construction industry. And today's guest leads one of the most ambitious infrastructure and urban design projects in the Southeast. I'm really excited to share with you all today Jack Cebe, who is the director of The Stitch, which is an initiative of the Atlanta Downtown Improvement District. And for anyone that might not be local to Atlanta or might have not heard of The Stitch proposes to basically cover 3/4 of a mile of the connector downtown, which in Atlanta, we decided sometime to put I-75 and I-85 together. We thought that would be a good idea. We're living through the repercussions now with traffic every day, all day long there. But The Stitch is going to cover that with a 17-acre park, and it's going to quote unquote stitch the neighborhood together. So we're really excited to see this come to life, and it's expected to generate over $9 billion in economic value and potentially create up to 18 million square feet of new mixed-use development and supporting the affordable housing initiative for the city. So we're really excited to see this project come online, and that is Jack's baby that he's managing day in and day out, bringing to life. So Jack, why don't you maybe share a little bit more about yourself before we get into the project itself?
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and appreciate you having me on the podcast. Yeah, so I'm, as you said, director of The Stitch. I've been working with the Atlanta Downtown Improvement District on this project for about 3.5 years now. And I came to this project. I had, prior to this, worked most of my career in the E&E consulting arena. I'm a landscape architect and a civil engineer by background, worked on transportation projects, placemaking projects, park projects for a number of different consulting firms over my career, and really was intrigued by the Stitch in some of my work in previous companies working on these capping type projects. Because if you're unfamiliar with these, interstate or infrastructure capping projects, it might seem like a crazy idea. Um, but in actuality, there are over 60 of these projects, in cities all across America built today, and hundreds of them in planning. And it's really, the purpose of these projects is we have a lot of our space in cities that has been doled out to transportation needs, and because there are a lot of transportation needs. But
Right.
if there are ways to make better use of these valuable spaces, and also be able to spur economic development, create amenities for communities such as parks, or some of these projects are overbuilt projects with private development over the interstate, putting the interstate in the tunnel, or a rail line in the tunnel. So projects like Millennium Park in Chicago, if you've been to the Bean in Chicago, that's actually a park on structure over a rail yard and a parking deck. Hudson Yards in New York, over a rail yard. Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, which is a very close example in many ways of what we're trying to do in Atlanta. Park over a state highway. The Big Dig in Boston,
Yeah.
a park over an interstate. And all those instances have really transformed the communities that they're in. It's a huge opportunity, a challenging opportunity in many ways, but it's really a key to unlocking a major part of our downtown here in Atlanta, which is why we've been at it for so long trying to make it happen.
Well, it certainly is exciting, and it did sound like one of those crazy ideas, when it first came about. But then you can show and you can point to it, like you just did, that the proof of concept is out there, that
Mhm.
it's not just a engineering idea, that it actually works. It can become a new asset. And when you're in a dense urban environment like Atlanta, where you can't really grow out too much more. The only option is to go up or kind of reuse, recycle things. It makes a lot of sense to kind of take the transportation throwaways and find a way to put something on top of it. So now the Stitch also happens to sit just adjacent to one of your alma maters. Am I correct in that? Didn't you go to Georgia Tech?
I did, yeah. I came to Atlanta 10 years ago for grad school at Georgia Tech, and I never left. Atlanta was is great, welcoming place, and has been really good to me. I've really enjoyed my time here. It's definitely home now.
Well, we're glad to have you. Although we'll tell others, Georgia's full. We've got too much traffic, the property taxes are going up, all the good stuff. But no, I joke. I joke. So let's talk a little bit more about the fun project, the Stitch, which feels really exciting. And I know that you are personally excited about it. And you've been working on it for a number of years, but we're approaching the end of 2025. Construction's going to start next year, right? Are we still on track for a 2026 construction start?
We will be shovel ready next year.
Okay.
We were planning on starting construction, next year, and I believe it will likely be 2027 now. If I'm sure some of you who are familiar with the Stitch had heard this news, we're advancing the project in large part through reconnecting communities grant from USDOT. Fortunately, a large portion of that grant was rescinded as part of the reconciliation bill this past summer. So we're still moving forward with the project, but that's had us, it's required us to go back and take another look at our funding and implementation approach. And so we're in the process of kind of finalizing what the new approach forward is, but the city's still very much on board. We're obviously still very much on board. The GDOT is still very much on board with the project. So we're moving forward and pivoting, and with any big project, things happen. And so, the key is perseverance and tenacity.
I like it. So maybe talk a little bit about where the project is today. You mentioned a few of those points, but do you have engineering and design and construction partners already lined up for the first phase? Have you started charting what the design might look like? Give us some insight into where we're actually at in the developmental process.
Yeah, so the project's been in the works for about 20 years, and a good portion of that time has been just really advancing the idea and the vision of the project. And when I came on board about 3 years ago, we were successful in getting some federal and local money earmarked for the project to begin to advance planning and design. And ultimately that snowballed into construction funding for the project as well. What we started out with about 3 years ago was creating a master plan for the project, because at its core, the project is a major infrastructure improvement. It's creating that 17 acres of park over the interstate. But really, if you look out beyond that, the whole intent of the project, like you mentioned earlier, Katie, is to help reconnect and revitalize this area of North Downtown. There hadn't been a whole lot going on here ever since the interstate was constructed, because no one really wants to live next to 500,000 cars driving by their front door every day, or open up their business in this area of town that had really been kind of back of house because of the busy interstate that runs through there. So in this area today, there's about 50 acres of parking lots and vacant buildings in the heart of our city, which is some of the most valuable land in the entire Southeast, downtown Atlanta. And so this project is really to cover up that barrier and turn it into a community asset to help drive the redevelopment and the reconnection of downtown and surrounding neighborhoods. And you mentioned earlier, we had the opportunity here with that 50 acres of developable land to make a huge dent in our housing demand as a region. We can build, what we estimate up to about 25,000 multifamily homes in this area. We can support, up to about 5,000 new jobs per year as a result of this project. And ultimately, that creates, about $9 billion in value for the city and the region of the state. So, we really need to be thoughtful around how the park is designed, how the park is operated, how we, implement the park, because we're not going to, build an entire 20 acres at once. That's a big undertaking that we just realistically don't have the resources to do all in one fell swoop. And so, the master plan helped us phase out, the different components of the project, and also look at, the area around the project and develop supportive programs and policies like zoning code changes, like affordable and workforce housing goals and funding strategies, so that it's really it gave us a comprehensive kind of district plan on how to roll out, this project. And we got a lot of input from the city on it and from the public and businesses to support this, which was important. So that was really the first phase of the development of the project, getting to where we are today. Since then, we've been advancing engineering on the project. We're at concept phase right now with phase one of three phases of the stitch. And what phase one includes is about 5 acres of that 17-acre park. So the first kind of center segment, we call it the heart of the stitch, because it's right in the middle. It's right off of Peachtree Street, which is kind of like downtown's Main Street if you're not from Atlanta. And so a very key part of the project that will create a great 5 acre park from the get-go once it's constructed over the interstate. It will also deliver about 8 miles of transportation improvements to adjacent streets and streets in the area. A lot of these streets were built for very high speeds in mind, for moving people as quickly, to and from the interstate, from offices downtown, jobs downtown. If you're not in Atlanta, you are familiar with your own city, the office environment, real estate environment is much different than it was just a few years ago. I worked for the Atlanta Downtown Improvement District, which is essentially the business improvement downtown, and we represent businesses downtown. And all these office property owners, they realize that future of downtown is, yes, office. There still will be office and needs to be office, but we really need people living downtown to create a 24/7, vibrant street life. And so we need to add a lot of residential downtown. And so to support that, these streets need to be rethought a bit to, have more friendly, wide sidewalks with street trees for pedestrians, for, you think about, where you want to walk along a street. It's not along a 5-lane road with cars whizzing by at, 50 miles an hour and a 4-foot sidewalk. It's, a nice wide sidewalk with shade in the summertime that's friendly for pushing a stroller, friendly for biking. And so you can walk to the park a few blocks away and feel comfortable. And that's what we're trying to do as a part of phase one with the streets surrounding the park. So, those components, like I mentioned, are in design right now. We're in concept phase. We hope to get through your preliminary engineering and NEPA approvals by next summer. And then from there, we will, start to implement components of that first phase, probably late 26 and 27 is how we plan on moving forward. And we hired a team, a very big team, multidisciplinary team that's been a great partner in all this. WSP Engineering is the prime consultant on the master plan all the way through final design. They have a lot of sub-consultants on their team, namely Hargraves Jones Landscape Architects out of New York. And that team, WSP and Hargraves, part of the reason we selected them is because they've worked on these types of interstate overbuild projects together and understand some of the nuanced issues that these projects need to address. So, they've been really helpful in guiding us through, a lot of the design challenges and making this a a very exciting park design that the public is just, chomping at the bit for it to happen. So it's been a great partnership. The project's moving forward really well with all the partners. And I will just add that in terms of delivery of phase one, so GDOT's a key partner with this. Obviously, the Georgia Department of Transportation, like other Department of Transportations, have oversight for the interstate highways. They are the expert at building interstate bridges in the state, hands down. So, we're very excited that they've agreed to, help us deliver this project. And, they will actually be managing the construction of the cap that the park will sit on top of the bridge through their design build procurement program. And so that's a big help for us in figuring out, how to deliver, a project of this size and complexity.
So, Jack, if I'm hearing you correctly, you've got phase one well underway. This has been a project long time coming,
Hmm.
but there's multiple phases still to come online in the future. So, still opportunities maybe for some of our listeners that might have expertise in this area to look at pursuing future phase work. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. And the design build contract, when we get to letting of that, when GDOT gets to letting of that, they'll be putting out a call for proposals from design build joint ventures for that. So that's a big opportunity. That's a part of phase one.
So, you in your role, what do you like to look for when you are considering and vetting design and construction partners? Like, what's most important to you when you're looking for those firms?
Yeah, well, I think in this project's case, there are so many important considerations. I'm just trying to remember back to when we were vetting. We had a lot of great qualified teams propose on this project, and I think really what stood out to us about the team that we selected was, one, their understanding and ability to deliver on, a project like this, which is, it has, a lot of components of, interstate bridge construction, of park construction, of green roof construction, public involvement, context sensitive solutions. It has all of those, but unlike I think other projects, really the key is making sure all of those different components work well together, which is a challenge. That's the real challenge of this, a project like the Stitch. And so this team, had delivered projects like this before. They understand, how to deliver major infrastructure projects in Georgia and the needs of Georgia Department of Transportation and the city and all the partners who are involved in, this type of project. And, I think the commitment to making sure we seize on this opportunity because, this is a huge investment and a huge opportunity if we get it right, and a huge missed opportunity if we get it wrong. And so, I mean, just the responsiveness to, all the different demands
Yeah.
that a project like this has is also key. And just, I think we felt when we selected this team that they really, checked all those boxes, from, having all the qualifications, but also being able to communicate as a team internally and also be responsive as a team to us, the client, and the other stakeholders in the project, and balance, sometimes competing needs and interests. So I think that was, all those things were really big factors when selecting the team led by WSP and Hargreaves Jones that we're working with.
That's great. For any of the listeners that want to know more about the Stitch, Jack and his team have put together a really great website. You can visit thestitchatl.com and take a virtual tour, see some of the project overviews. There's lots of ways that you can subscribe to stay up to date on the project as it moves through. So I'm going to direct listeners to the website to go get that information. But Jack, I want to spend maybe the next few minutes talking a little bit more about you and something that stands out to me when I look at your career. Not only are you somehow bridging both landscape architecture, very creative, with a civil engineer mind? I'm married to a civil engineer, and he can never be a landscape architect. Like those two halves of his brain don't connect. So it's pretty impressive that you've done that. But what's also impressive is how you've often shaped these kind of coalitions around you, where you're bringing together public agencies, the private partners, you've got the community involved. So I want to talk a little bit about how you've utilized relationships to help shape, your professional, personal journey, how they influence how you make decisions, kind of how you view the currency of the modern day relationship. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that.
Yeah. Well, I think, some of the most valuable education I got as I was, going through college and grad school was that landscape architecture degree. And I've always been, really, yes, I am a landscape architect and engineer and have designed both types of projects and, understand, I think, have one foot in each sandbox and really understand, what different disciplines are, where they're coming from on different issues. And I think, one of the things that the landscape architecture program that I was in, taught me early on was just the power of being able to take input from others, really understand, I think, what the critical issues are with the different stakeholders, being able to effectively listen and translate that into solutions that I think work for everyone. The Stitch is not my idea. It's a very exciting idea, and people, I think, much more creative than I am, came up with this idea and this, solution for this part of downtown. And, I think my sweet spot is, trying to find a way to address all these different needs of all the different stakeholders to figure out how to make something like this happen. It's about listening, it's about effective communications, because a project like this doesn't happen without public support and vocal public support, whether it's, the business community downtown, the general public being in the news cycle. We got to do all those things to make a project like this happen. And so, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like I'm really just, more than anything, trying to take inputs from people and turn those into directions that address all the different needs of all the different stakeholders of the project. And I think that's really where I think landscape architects training serves us well, and being able to do that. And then I think, the background in civil engineering has helped me, understand where civil engineers, are coming from, trying to make, those two key project partners, make it so that they're able to work well together and get some really inspiring things done. So yeah, I think that's kind of, my key place and how I fit into this project, helping to move it forward.
That's awesome. You started talking a little bit about communication, and I have to imagine these complex projects where you've got, these tiered, layered project teams. How do you orchestrate communication across those diverse project teams and know who's getting the right information and who's supposed to respond, kind of holding accountability for that? What does that look like, Jack?
A lot of meetings, as you can imagine, a lot of documentation, and, I think just, a lot of it boils down to good project management skills, being able to balance the needs of the project, with the budget, and set expectations and reinforce expectations when needed. And I think just understand how all these different, components of the project come together. And, one of the things that I think I reflect on from my days. I think being on the design delivery side, that was frustrating to me, and I'm assuming to others too who are in the same situation, is working with clients that don't give you kind of the full picture of why decisions are being made, why a certain direction is being set. And so, now that I'm on the client side, I think, having that consulting background has been really helpful in understanding how to effectively communicate to our consultant partners, because they're part of the team, and you gotta keep them in the loop, and
Yeah.
you don't want to you have to build trust. And yeah, you're paying them to do this work for you, but you're going to get a better product if they have the full picture, they feel like they're part of the team and in the fold. And so I really try to treat it as, we're all teammates working towards this common goal, and provide all the information, the background information on, why we're taking a certain direction or changing direction, being as transparent as possible, because ultimately it's working with people. And, you have to treat others like, you'd want to be treated on your team. So I really try to strive to create that sort of, working environment among our team moving this project forward.
While we all are professionals in our services, are basically our knowledge and expertise, we're all coming together to do these projects. And it's not if, but when a challenge is going to arise, especially on a complex project like one of these capping projects. So, Jack, do you have any advice for our listeners that might be young in their career on how do they authentically build relationships kind of across the team, or up and down the ladder of their organization, so that they can start building their own tribe? Where they hit these challenges, they've got a group to go to, to kind of bounce ideas around or to get solutions and stuff like that. I think there's this growing concern that younger generations have worked so autonomously and with technology that outside of that, if the answer's not right there on the computer screen, they don't really know how to problem solve. And a lot of that, the older generations really got from their network. So,
Hmm.
anything to speak to there?
I think as a millennial, I have experienced a little bit of both, I guess.
Right.
And yeah, I think that I feel fortunate that I was in place early on in my career, a big office where you just walk around the office and, oh, you need to go talk to so and so in water to get their thoughts on that, and you strike up water cooler conversations, and get to know other people in the office. So, and I know it's a lot of people are working more remotely now. It's harder to have those kind of random conversations
Yeah,
where
just
you
random
meet
interaction.
people, you build your network. So, I might not be the best person to tell people how to do it, but I definitely think it's super important to be intentional about reaching out to others and asking questions. I think now inviting people to chat, inviting people, whether it's virtual or going out for a coffee, making space for that is just, so important for expanding, yes, your resources, and also your own knowledge. Cause, I think ultimately we learn best from doing and from learning from others. And I feel lucky to have had some very good mentors in my career, and have, an environment where I could just kind of walk around the office and people questions. And, I imagine it would be pretty challenging to have those things as a young professional. But yeah, just I think encourage young professionals to seek that out if it's not immediately available. And some of these new tools are, I think, great ways to reach out to people that probably I didn't necessarily have access to early on in my career, like LinkedIn. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many people cold connect me on LinkedIn and say, like, hey, I'm a student and would love to grab coffee or do a 30-minute Teams meeting. And they, so many professionals always understand the value of that,
Right.
for them when they were in that seat, and they're often very willing to give their time. I always try to give my time to young professionals and who are trying to grow their network and grow their expertise. Don't be afraid to reach out to other people. One of the things I also encourage is, when you're a young professional or a student, like, go to as many conferences as you can, while they're cheap. You can go to a lot of conferences for free as a student. I think, I was coming into the job market in the Great Recession out of undergrad, and I was like, well, I'm just gonna try to network my tail off and
Right.
see what happens. And I went to anything, remotely related to landscape architecture. That's ultimately how I got an internship that led to my first job. And yeah, just the value of face-to-face interaction, whether it's in-person meeting or a network event or even like a virtual meeting where you have your camera on. So it's so invaluable. Any young professionals out there, get involved in professional organizations, go to conferences, go network, strike up conversations with people in your office. Like, that is so much more valuable than any other aspects in the long run for your career, right? I mean, you need to, your certifications are important, being understanding processes are important in, the for near term goals, but for the long term arc of your career, like, your network is everything. So
For sure. Great, great advice. And Jack, thank you so much for joining me on the show today and for sharing a little bit about your journey, your passion points, and certainly giving us the inside scoop on the Stitch. So, again, I'm just going to remind everyone, if you want to learn more about the project, the Stitch, go to the Stitch at atl.com. That's where you can find all the plans and all the frequently asked questions, all the good stuff there. And I think, Jack, you just gave everybody an open call to connect with you on LinkedIn if you want to.
sure, yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
I will respond in time, maybe not immediately, but I will definitely get back to you.
absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for listening till the end. This has been another episode of AEC Marketing for Principals, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.